Hi, it's James from the Canadian Urban Garden, and today I've got 4 tips to help you decide what to grow in your garden this year. Tip number 1, grow what you like to eat or what you like to look at. In my garden we grow peas and carrots. The kids love these things. I grow potatoes because I love them as well, and tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers and corn and beans and squash and all kinds of different things that we love to eat here. If you grow only things that you'd like to eat, you won't make the same mistakes that I've made in the past years. Sometimes I would grow too many tomatoes and have a glut because I don't like them that much, or somebody in the house doesn't want to eat them. Or sometimes I would grow things that I just, eggplants or zucchinis, and there's just too many zucchinis. Last year, I made this mistake. I grew spaghetti squash. I grew a beautiful spaghetti squash. It was huge. It was like this big and the perfect color, and I harvested it in September and put it in the cold room. And then, because spaghetti squash is pretty gross, I just left it there in the cold room for months. And then last month I went downstairs and picked up the spaghetti squash and put it straight into the compost because it was rotten. You might think that's a complete waste of time, and it mostly was, but it did give me an idea. I thought, what can I call this channel? And at one point I was considering the regular everyday garden guy. I went as far as to ask John Lajoie on his website if I could use the line, I grew a pretty big spaghetti squash, motherfucker. Tip number 2, know your climate. We're going to show you a map of Canada's plant hardiness zones. As you can see here in Montreal, we're in zone 5B. It depends really on who you talk to though, because we could be in plant hardiness zone 5A, 5B, or 6A. What that means is that we have a fairly short growing season, but we do have really hot summers. That's how they decide the plant hardiness zone. They take your last frost date in the spring and your first frost date in the fall and your average temperature over the summer and put you in a zone. And then these zones sort of dictate what you can and can't grow. You'll be able to go on Google or in a gardening book and be able to find information on specific plants you want to grow and if they are hardy to your zone. I grew up in northern Alberta. That's plant hardiness zone 3B. And we always had things like green onions and peas and carrots in our garden. But it was fairly limited to leafy greens, root crops, and a few other things because they have a very short growing season and a low average temperature. Here in Montreal, because it's a bit longer and it's much hotter, we can grow other things like cucumbers and melons and all kinds of different things. Sometimes even more important than that is your microclimate. I used to live 2 blocks from here on the other side of the street. So in the afternoon, the garden was shaded by the building. So it wasn't quite as hot. And then here I have a west-facing garden. So there's no shade in it and it has the hot sun all afternoon. So it's almost like it changed plant hardiness zone just by changing the side of the street. Tip number 3, measure your space. A lot of beginner gardeners will either put too much in their garden or not enough. There's a fairly simple solution to this. It's called square foot gardening. This is a book written by a guy named Mel Bartholomew, who a few decades ago revolutionized the way that we grow produce in small spaces. What he did was he systematized how many plants of all kinds you can fit in a square foot. And then you can just scale up to the size of your garden. There are online vegetable garden planners where you can just drag and drop fruits and vegetables and it'll tell you exactly how many you can plant using the square foot gardening method. Sometimes I like to play on those, but most of the time what I like to do actually is draw the plans. Here's an example. I'll do this over and over again throughout the year. I just draw them on grid paper just like that. So if you want to see me draw the plans, go to my TikTok at Canadian Urban Garden. And finally, tip number 4, don't sacrifice the good for the sake of the perfect. If you haven't started your onions and peppers yet, don't freak out. Just start them now. They'll still produce. If you can't find your favorite seeds, don't worry about it. You'll be able to look somewhere online and find it, or worst case scenario, go to a box store or even to a grocery store. They'll have something you can plant. In the spring, when you pass your last frost date and you haven't gotten anything in the ground yet, don't worry about it. Just go and pick up some seedlings and use those. I'm going to do all of these things over the course of this spring. It'll work out just fine as long as you just get started. And finally, in the summer or in the fall, when you feel like you have too much produce and too much and too much and too much and you can't take care of it all, don't worry about it. Just pick what you can, eat what you can, and compost the rest. It's okay. So, those are my 4 tips for how to decide what to grow in the garden this year. Thank you all for watching, and tune in next week to see what kind of seeds I like to buy.